In Sri Lanka, Gehan, we see pockets of sporadic ethno-linguistic, ethno-religious violence, racism, which have become ubiquitous and commonplace, from microaggressions to more pronounced politically charged attacks. Laws are essentially meant to protect, not target, harass, intimidate. But we have seen countless instances where this particular act, the ICCPR, and it's not the only act, which has been used to target dissenters of the state, the government. So the question arises, is the ICCPR fit for purpose? And also, what do we do about this targeting, this unfair way of applying these good laws?
So I think it would be insincere to say that the text of the ICCPR is perfect, because it was actually framed in 1940s, and it took a couple of decades for people to negotiate the text, and finally in 1966, that's when the final text came out. So it's actually a covenant that is quite old, and sometimes you might say that some of those provisions need to be revisited. Now, when you replicate word for word those provisions into our law, there could be problems. And the ICCPR Act, Section 3, criminalizes incitement to violence, discrimination, or hostility without actually defining things like hostility, right? So there are problems.
Right.
I'm not saying that this, even though it's a model law, I don't think it is a perfect law. But you're asking, I mean, it's a really valid question to ask whether it's fit for purpose, because the question arises, now what is it actually being used for? It's actually being used as a blasphemy law. And it's very curious and very interesting and highly appreciated that the Supreme Court, in that judgment I just referred to, even though the case didn't deal with blasphemy per se, went out of its way to make the observation that the ICCPR Act and Section 3 is not meant to prohibit or criminalize blasphemy. Why did it say that? Because it identified that problem, that it's being used not to protect people from incitement to violence, but to protect people who are offended by statements that may seem like they offend a particular religion or religious figure, which is what blasphemy is really about.
Right.
So I think that's an important element of that judgment that we need to focus on. Now, the Human Rights Commission back in 2019 issued a set of guidelines on how law enforcement ought to understand Section 3 of the ICCPR Act and what elements to look for. And again, the Supreme Court actually endorsed those guidelines. And the hope is, with this shift, with the Supreme Court taking this position very, very clearly, that there will be a trickle-down effect, and the law enforcement officials, the prosecutors, will start taking the Supreme Court's directions, the Human Rights Council's guidelines, the Human Rights Commission's guidelines seriously, and whether that will manifest in a shift in how the Act is actually implemented.
Political will is required for all of these manifestations to...
I mean, one has to hope that the police, the prosecutorial apparatus isn't governed by political motivations. I mean, where the hope is that you have someone arrested and investigated, and then eventually, if there is evidence that supports a prosecution, prosecuted, and then it goes before an independent judge, and if there's evidence to say that the violation has taken place or the offense has taken place, convicted and then punished, all without politicians getting involved. That is the hope. That is the system that we are supposed to believe in. And you're smirking because you don't think that is necessarily the case.
No, I'd love to think that.